The scream cut through the pine forest like a hawk's cry, and Finn Norwood dropped the elk he had been dragging toward his cabin to run toward the sound without hesitation. He found her crumpled at the base of a rocky slope, her dark hair tangled with pine needles and her face pale as winter snow. The woman wore a simple calico dress that had torn in several places during her fall, and her right leg bent at an angle that made Finn's jaw tighten. She was conscious, barely, her green eyes wide with pain and fear as she looked up at the massive man who emerged from the tree line like something out of legend. "Easy now," Finn said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His dark hair hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. "I'm going to help you." The woman tried to speak, but only managed a whimper. Finn knelt beside her, his experienced hands moving carefully over her leg. He had seen enough injuries in his years trapping and hunting in these Arizona mountains to know she had broken it badly. The fall must have been from higher up the slope, and he wondered what in God's name she had been doing out here alone. "My name is Finn," he told her, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I'm going to carry you back to my cabin. It is going to hurt, but I need to set that leg before infection takes hold. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Fiona," she whispered. "Fiona Davies." "All right, Fiona Davies. Hold on to me." He slipped one massive arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. She cried out despite his care, and he felt her fingers clutch desperately at his buckskin shirt. The walk back to his cabin took nearly an hour, and by the time they arrived, Fiona had fainted from the pain. Finn laid her gently on his bed, the only real piece of furniture in the rough-hewn cabin he called home. He worked quickly, building up the fire and heating water, gathering the supplies he would need. Setting a broken bone was never pleasant, but it had to be done. When Fiona woke, she found herself staring up at exposed log beams and a man who looked like he had been carved from the same mountains that surrounded them. Finn sat beside the bed holding a tin cup. "Drink this," he said. "It will help with the pain." She took the cup with shaking hands and sipped the bitter liquid, grimacing at the taste. "What is it?" "Willow bark tea and a little whiskey. Your leg is set and splinted. You're going to need to stay off it for at least 6 weeks, maybe longer." Fiona's eyes widened. 6 weeks? But I cannot. I have to get back to town. I work at the boarding house and Mrs. Henderson will dismiss me if I do not return. "Where were you trying to go?" "Sierra Vista. I was trying to find a shortcut back from the springs. I thought I could save time." Finn shook his head. "Those slopes are treacherous even for experienced climbers. What were you doing at the springs?" Fiona's cheeks colored slightly. "I wash linens there. The water is cleaner than what we have in town. Sierra Vista is 8 miles from here, most of it steep mountain trail. Even when your leg heals, that is a difficult walk for someone not used to these mountains." "I have been walking it for months," Fiona said defensively. "I just lost my footing this time." Finn looked at her with something like disbelief. "You walk 8 miles through mountain wilderness to wash clothes? And to bring them back. Mrs. Henderson is very particular about clean linens. That is 16 miles. "I am aware." Finn stood and moved to the fireplace, stirring something in a pot that smelled surprisingly good. "Well, you will not be walking anywhere for a while. I will ride into Sierra Vista tomorrow and let this Mrs. Henderson know what happened." "She will dismiss me," Fiona said quietly, turning her face toward the wall. "Then she is a fool." Fiona did not respond, and Finn let the silence settle between them. He had lived alone in these mountains for 5 years, ever since the war had ended, and he had found himself unable to return to a world that no longer made sense to him. The quiet had been his companion, the solitude his refuge. But looking at this small, injured woman lying in his bed, he felt something stir in his chest that he had thought long dead. Over the next few days, Finn cared for Fiona with a tenderness that surprised them both. He made her willow bark tea 3 times a day, fed her rabbit stew and fresh biscuits, and kept the fire burning through the cold mountain nights. Fiona, for her part, tried to be as little trouble as possible, though her leg throbbed constantly and she felt helpless in a way she had not since childhood. On the 4th day, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why do you live out here alone?" Finn was whittling a new splint, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small knife. He did not look up. "Why do you walk 16 miles through the mountains to wash clothes?" I asked first. He smiled slightly at that, a small crack in his stoic facade. "Fair enough. I came back from the war and found I did not fit in towns anymore. Too many people, too much noise. I bought this land with my discharge pay and built this cabin. I trap, hunt, sell pelts in town when I need supplies. It suits me." "Do you never get lonely?" "Do you?" Fiona considered the question seriously. "Yes. I came to Sierra Vista 2 years ago after my parents died of fever. I had no other family, no prospects. Mrs. Henderson gave me work and a place to sleep, but it is not a home. The other girls at the boarding house think I am strange because I prefer walking in the mountains to sitting in town gossiping." "You are not strange," Finn said, finally meeting her eyes. "You are just different. Is that not the same thing?" "No. Strange suggests something wrong. Different is just being true to who you are." Fiona felt her breath catch slightly at the intensity in his dark eyes. She had never met a man who looked at her the way Finn did, as though he could see straight through to her soul and found nothing there to frighten him. When Finn rode into Sierra Vista the next day, he found Mrs. Henderson to be exactly as difficult as he had imagined. She was a thin, pinched woman who looked at his rough clothes and long hair with obvious distaste. "Fiona Davies has been a satisfactory employee," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice clipped, "but I cannot hold her position indefinitely. If she cannot return to work within the week, I will have to replace her. She broke her leg badly. She will not be walking for at least a month. Then I am afraid she is dismissed. Please collect her belongings from the attic room." Finn felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You would turn out an injured woman with nowhere to go?" "I run a business, Mr. Norwood, not a charity. I am sure Fiona will find some solution to her predicament." Finn collected Fiona's meager belongings, a single carpet bag containing 2 dresses, some undergarments, a worn Bible, and a small wooden box, and rode back to his cabin with anger simmering in his chest. He had seen cruelty during the war, had witnessed things that still haunted his dreams, but there was something particularly cold about turning away a person in need during peacetime. When he told Fiona the news, she took it with a calm that worried him more than tears would have. "I expected as much," she said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson is not known for her charity. What will you do? I suppose that depends on you. Will you throw me out when my leg heals?" Finn was shocked by the question. "Of course not. You can stay here as long as you need." "I will not be a burden. When I can walk again, I will find work in town." "Doing what? Walking another 16 miles to wash someone else's linens?" Fiona's chin lifted stubbornly. "If I must. Or you could stay here?" The words surprised him as much as they did her. Fiona stared at him, her green eyes wide. "What?" Finn ran a hand through his hair, suddenly uncertain. "I mean, this cabin is too big for one person anyway. You could stay, help with the cooking and mending. I would continue to hunt and trap. It would be a partnership. People would talk. Let them. I do not go into town often enough to care what people say. I would care. Then we will figure something out. But I will not see you turned out into the cold with a broken leg and nowhere to go." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned long ago that crying solved nothing. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." Finn met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I would like to." As winter deepened over the mountains, Fiona's legs slowly healed. Finn proved to be patient and attentive, checking the splint daily, making sure she moved her toes to keep the blood flowing, adjusting the splint as the swelling went down. He fashioned her a pair of crutches from sturdy branches, sanding them smooth so they would not hurt her hands. Fiona, determined not to be useless, did what she could from the bed. She mended Finn's clothes, which were in desperate need of attention. She organized his supplies, creating order out of chaos. She even attempted to give him a haircut, though she had never cut a man's hair before. "Hold still," she said, frowning in concentration, as she snipped carefully at his dark locks. She sat on the edge of the bed while he sat on a stool in front of her, and she tried not to notice how her fingers trembled slightly when they brushed against his neck. "I am holding still. You are the one shaking." "I'm not shaking. The scissors are dull." Fiona. She stopped, the scissors poised above his head. What? You're doing fine. When she finished, Finn's hair was shorter, though still longer than most men wore it, curling slightly at the ends. He looked at his reflection in the small mirror he used for shaving and nodded approvingly. Much better. Thank you. You're welcome. They fell into a comfortable routine. Finn would wake before dawn to check his trap lines, returning by mid-morning with whatever game he had caught. Fiona would have coffee brewing, and as she grew stronger, simple meals prepared. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing. Finn told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his 3 brothers who had all died in the war. Fiona told him about growing up in Texas, about her father who had been a school teacher, and her mother who could make anything grow. She had such a gift with plants, Fiona said one evening as they sat by the fire, her crutches propped beside her. She could take the most barren patch of earth and coax life from it. I always thought I would learn that from her, but then the fever came. How old were you? 19. Old enough to be on my own, but young enough to still feel lost without them. So you came to Arizona. I heard there was work in the territories. I thought maybe I could start fresh, become someone new. Instead, I just became a girl who walked too far to wash clothes. Finn reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond caring for her injury, and Fiona felt her heart skip at the warmth of his calloused palm against hers. You're more than that, he said quietly. You're brave and strong and too stubborn for your own good. Those sound like your qualities. Exactly. We match. Fiona laughed, a sound that lit up the cabin more than any fire could. Finn realized he had been waiting to hear that laugh, had been working toward it without even knowing it. By February, Fiona could walk short distances without the crutches, though her leg ached when the weather turned cold. Finn built her a walking stick from a sturdy piece of oak, carved smooth and decorated with a simple pattern of leaves. For when you are ready to explore, he told her, pressing it into her hands. Explore what? The mountains. I want to show you why I love it here. True to his word, as soon as Fiona could walk comfortably with the stick, Finn began taking her on short trips around his property. He showed her the creek where he caught trout, the meadow where deer came to graze, the outcropping of rock where he sat sometimes to watch the sunset. Fiona drank it all in, her eyes bright with wonder. It is beautiful, she breathed, standing on the outcropping with the valley spread below them like a painting. I never saw it like this before. When I was walking to the springs, I was always too focused on where I was putting my feet. That is the difference between going somewhere and being somewhere, Finn said. He stood beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. You were always in such a hurry to get to your destination that you never stopped to look around. I suppose you are right. I usually am. She laughed and swatted his arm. Arrogant man. Confident. There is a difference. As spring arrived, painting the mountains with wildflowers, Fiona found herself thinking about the future for the first time in years. She had spent so long simply surviving, moving from one day to the next, that she had forgotten what it felt like to actually want something. But now, watching Finn work in the clearing beside the cabin, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he split wood for the summer supply, she knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted this life, this man, this feeling of being home. But wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it were two different things entirely. One morning in late March, Finn came to breakfast with a serious expression on his face. I need to ride into Sierra Vista for supplies, he said. I will be gone most of the day. Will you be all right here alone? Of course. I'm not an invalid anymore, Finn. I know. I just worry. About what? Bears? Mountain lions? I have your rifle, and you have taught me how to use it. Not about that, he paused, struggling with words. About you being lonely. Fiona felt her chest tighten at the raw honesty in his voice. I am not lonely when I am here. This place, your cabin, it feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since my parents died. Good, Finn said, and something in his eyes made Fiona's breath catch. That is good. While Finn was in town, Fiona decided to surprise him. She had been gathering wildflowers from the meadow over the past week, drying them in bunches. Now she used them to brighten the cabin, setting small bouquets on the table and the mantel. She also baked bread, something she had been practicing, and made a venison stew with the meat Finn had smoked. She was stirring the stew when she heard a horse approaching. But it was not Finn's familiar paint, it was a stranger's bay, and Fiona felt a spike of fear as she reached for the rifle Finn kept by the door. The man who dismounted was young, perhaps 25, with a badge pinned to his vest. He held up his hands when he saw the rifle. "Easy there, miss. I'm Sheriff Coleman from Sierra Vista. I'm looking for Finn Norwood." Fiona lowered the rifle slightly but did not set it down. "He is not here. What do you want with him?" "Just to talk. Are you Miss Davies?" "I am." "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you were staying up here. Caused quite a stir in town, if you do not mind my saying." "I do mind, actually. My living arrangements are my own business." The sheriff had the grace to look embarrassed. "You're right, of course. I actually came because there has been some trouble in the area. Bandits hit a stagecoach last week, killed the driver. They are believed to be hiding in these mountains. I am warning folks to be careful." Fiona felt cold despite the warm spring air. "Thank you for the warning. Will you tell Mr. Norwood when he returns?" "I will." After the sheriff left, Fiona found herself unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. She kept the rifle close and jumped at every sound, imagining bandits behind every tree. When Finn finally returned as the sun was setting, she flew out of the cabin and practically threw herself into his arms. He caught her easily, his face surprised but pleased. "I take it you missed me?" he said, a smile playing at his lips. "The sheriff came. He said there are bandits in the mountains." Finn's expression turned serious immediately. He dismounted, keeping one arm around Fiona as he led his horse to the small barn. "Tell me everything." After she repeated the sheriff's warning, Finn was quiet for a long moment. "We will need to be more careful. I will teach you to shoot better, and I will set up some warning signals around the property. But Fiona, I want you to know something." "What?" "I will not let anyone hurt you. Not bandits, not wild animals, not anything. You are under my protection now." The fierce intensity in his voice made Fiona shiver, but not from fear. "Finn, I know we have not talked about what this is between us. I know I should probably court you properly, take you to church socials and dances like a gentleman. But I am not a gentleman, Fiona. I am a mountain man who lives alone in the wilderness. All I know is that I wake up every morning grateful that you are here, and I go to sleep every night terrified that you will decide to leave." Fiona reached up and cupped his bearded face in her hands. "I'm not going anywhere. You should. You deserve better than this rough life, better than a man who is more comfortable with animals than people. What I deserve is to make my own choices, and I choose you, Finn Norwood. I choose this life, these mountains, this cabin. I choose all of it." Finn pulled her close and kissed her, his lips warm and gentle despite his rough exterior. Fiona melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I do not have much to offer except this cabin and my promise to take care of you for the rest of my life. But if you will have me, I swear I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "Yes," Fiona whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They rode into Sierra Vista together the following week, Fiona sitting in front of Finn on his horse since the trail was too difficult for her to walk, even with her leg mostly healed. Finn's arms surrounded her, keeping her steady, and Fiona thought about how this had become her favorite place in the world, safe in the circle of his embrace. The town was small but bustling, with a main street lined with wooden buildings. They went first to the general store where Finn needed to trade his pelts, and Fiona could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them. She held her head high, refusing to be ashamed. Mrs. Henderson was standing outside the boarding house as they rode past, and her expression was sour enough to curdle milk. "Fiona Davies!" she called out. "I see you have recovered from your injury." Fiona looked down at the older woman from her perch on Finn's horse. "I have, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you for your concern." "Concern? I hardly think living in sin in the mountains with a strange man warrants congratulations." Finn tensed behind her, but Fiona placed a calming hand on his arm. "We are not living in sin. We are getting married. We came to town to see the minister." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Married? To him? His name is Finn Norwood. And yes, I am marrying him. Now, if you will excuse us, we have business to attend to." As they rode away, Finn chuckled. You handled that well. I have had months of practice imagining what I would say to her. They found the minister at the small white church at the end of the main street. Reverend Matthews was a kind man in his 50s who listened to their story without judgment. I would be happy to marry you, he said, though traditionally we would post the banns for 3 weeks first. Could we not do it sooner? Fiona asked. We have been living together, and while nothing improper has happened, I would like to make our situation official as soon as possible. The Reverend considered this. I suppose given the circumstances we could waive the bans. Would you like to marry today? Fiona and Finn looked at each other. Today? Fiona said. Why not? Finn replied. Unless you want a big wedding. Fiona thought about white dresses and flowers and crowds of people watching. Then she thought about the cabin in the mountains, the peace of the forest, the simple life they were building together. No, today is perfect. They were married an hour later in the small church, with only the Reverend's wife as witness. Fiona wore the best of her 2 dresses, a simple blue calico, and Finn had put on a clean shirt. He held her hands gently in his much larger ones as they exchanged vows, his voice steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Finn kissed Fiona with a tenderness that made her eyes water. This rough, strong man who could survive alone in the wilderness was treating her like she was made of spun glass, precious and irreplaceable. They spent the night at the town's small hotel, the first time Fiona had slept in a real bed with clean sheets since her injury. But she found herself missing the cabin, missing the sound of the wind in the pines and the crackling of the fire. Are you happy? Finn asked as they lay together in the darkness, his arm around her shoulders. Happier than I have ever been, Fiona said honestly, though I will be happier still when we are home. Home, Finn repeated softly, testing the word. Yes, let us go home. They returned to the cabin the next day, and Fiona felt her heart lift as it came into view. It was just a simple log structure with a stone chimney, but it was theirs. Finn carried her across the threshold despite her protests, and they spent their first full day as husband and wife, making the cabin truly into a home. Over the following months, they fell into the rhythm of married life. Fiona took over the cooking and the garden Finn helped her plant in the clearing. She grew tomatoes and beans and squash, coaxing them from the mountain soil the way her mother had taught her. Finn continued his trapping and hunting, but he found himself hurrying home earlier each day, eager to see his wife. They talked about everything. Finn told her stories of his childhood, of swimming in creeks and climbing trees with his brothers. Fiona told him about the books she had loved, the dreams she had once had of seeing the ocean. They learned each other's habits, likes and dislikes, fears and hopes, and they loved each other with an intensity that sometimes surprised them both. Finn had never imagined he could feel this way about another person, this fierce protective love mixed with desire and tenderness. Fiona had never known that marriage could be a partnership of equals, that a man could be strong without being domineering. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Fiona asked a question that had been on her mind. Do you miss your family? Finn was quiet for a long moment. Every day, but especially the brothers I lost. James was the oldest, then Samuel, then Thomas, then me. We were supposed to all go home after the war, work the farm together. But only I made it back. I'm sorry. It is not your fault. War takes what it wants without asking permission. He pulled her closer. But I have you now. You are my family, Fiona. You and whatever children God might bless us with. You want children? Do you not? Fiona smiled in the darkness. I do. I want this cabin full of little ones running around, tracking mud inside and getting into mischief. Then we will fill it with them. Their first real test came in September, when Fiona needed to go into town for supplies. Her leg had healed well, but the trail was still too difficult for her to manage alone, especially carrying heavy sacks. I will take you, Finn said immediately. You have to check your trap lines. I do not want to interrupt your work. You are not interrupting anything. Besides, I like any excuse to spend the day with you. So it became their routine. Whenever Fiona needed to go to town, Finn would carry her on his horse, his arms secure around her as they navigated the steep mountain trail. The townspeople grew used to seeing them arrive this way, the massive mountain man and his small wife, obviously devoted to each other. Sometimes Mrs. Henderson would sniff disapprovingly, but most people in Sierra Vista had come to respect Finn and Fiona. They saw how Finn looked at his wife, how carefully he helped her down from the horse, how he stayed close whenever other men were around. They saw how Fiona glowed with happiness, how her laughter rang out more freely than it ever had when she worked at the boarding house. They are good for each other, Reverend Matthews told his wife one Sunday after Finn and Fiona had attended the service. Sometimes God brings people together in unexpected ways. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Fiona realized she was pregnant. She told Finn one evening as they prepared dinner together, and he stopped chopping vegetables to stare at her. "Pregnant? Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed 2 monthly courses, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." Finn set down the knife and crossed to her in 2 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy?" "Fiona, I am terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. We are going to be parents." That winter was long and cold, but Finn made sure the cabin was warm and well stocked. He was overprotective to the point of absurdity, insisting that Fiona rest constantly, that she not lift anything heavier than a teacup, that she stay wrapped in blankets by the fire. "Finn, I am pregnant, not dying," she told him with exasperation, after he refused to let her help bring in firewood. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Yes, but this is my baby, my wife. I'm allowed to worry." "You are allowed to drive me mad, apparently." Despite her frustration with his hovering, Fiona was touched by how much he cared. He would spend hours with his hand on her growing belly, marveling at each kick and movement. He talked to the baby constantly, telling it about the mountains, about the animals they would see, about how loved it would be. When Fiona expressed worry about giving birth so far from town, Finn rode to Sierra Vista and convinced the local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, to come stay with them for the last month of the pregnancy. She was a practical woman in her 60s who had delivered half the babies in the territory, and her presence calmed Fiona's fears. "You have good wide hips," Mrs. Patterson told her bluntly, "and you are strong from all that walking you used to do. You will be fine." The baby came on a warm May morning, arriving with the spring flowers. Fiona labored for 10 hours while Finn paced outside like a caged animal, unable to bear hearing her cries. But when Mrs. Patterson finally called him in and placed the red-faced, squalling infant in his arms, Finn felt his heart crack open in a way he had never imagined possible. "A son," Mrs. Patterson announced, "a healthy baby boy." Finn carried the baby to where Fiona lay, exhausted, but glowing on the bed. "Look what we made," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at him, Fiona. He is perfect." "What should we name him?" Fiona asked, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. Finn thought about his brothers, about the family he had lost. "Samuel. After my brother who loved to climb trees and always made everyone laugh, I would like him to have that name if you agree." "Samuel Norwood," Fiona said softly. "Yes, that is perfect." Being parents changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Finn discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, spending hours rocking Samuel when he was fussy, changing his nappies without complaint, singing old folk songs his own father had taught him. Fiona bloomed into motherhood, her love for their son as fierce as any mountain lion protecting its cub. But they made sure not to lose themselves entirely in parenthood. On warm evenings, they would take Samuel outside to watch the sunset, Finn holding the baby while Fiona leaned against his side. They still talked about their dreams, their plans for the future. They still stole kisses when Samuel napped. They still loved each other with the same intensity that had brought them together. When Samuel was 6 months old, Fiona brought up an idea she had been considering. "I want to start a business," she said one morning over breakfast, "making herbal remedies. My mother taught me which plants were good for what ailments, and there are so many growing wild around here. I could gather them, prepare tinctures and salves, sell them in town." Finn looked at her with pride. "That's a wonderful idea. You could use part of the barn for a workroom. You do not think it is foolish? We do not exactly need the money. It is not foolish at all. You have knowledge and skills that could help people. Why should you not use them?" So Fiona began her business, gathering plants during Samuel's naps, preparing remedies in the evenings while Finn watched the baby. She started small, selling her wares from a table outside the general store once a month. But word spread quickly about the mountain woman whose remedies actually worked, and soon people were making the trek to the cabin to buy directly from her. It gave Fiona a sense of purpose beyond motherhood, allowed her to use the knowledge her mother had passed down, and it brought in extra money that they saved for Samuel's future. 2 years after Samuel was born, Fiona was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And when their second child arrived on a snowy December morning, Fiona and Finn were delighted to welcome a daughter. "She looks like you," Finn said, studying the baby's delicate features. "She has your nose, your chin." "She has your eyes," Fiona countered. "Look how dark they are." They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew around the cabin each summer. Samuel, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from nappy changes to feeding times. "Gentle," Finn would remind him, as Samuel reached out to touch Rose's soft hair. "She is very small." "When will she be big enough to play?" Samuel asked, his young face serious. "In a few years. But you can help take care of her until then." Life in the cabin was full and busy with 2 young children. Some days Fiona barely had time to catch her breath between feeding Rose, chasing after Samuel, preparing meals, and working on her remedies. But she had never been happier. This was the life she had dreamed of without even knowing it, this full, rich existence surrounded by people she loved. Finn was an involved father, teaching Samuel to track animals, showing him how to identify different plants, telling him stories about the mountains. He was gentler with Rose, cradling her tiny body in his large hands as though she might break, singing her to sleep with old lullabies. "You are wonderful with them," Fiona told him one evening after both children were finally asleep. They sat together on the porch, enjoying the rare moment of quiet. "I had good examples growing up. My father was stern but fair, and my mother was all love and warmth. I try to be a bit of both. You succeed." As the children grew, Fiona found that her legs sometimes bothered her on cold days or when she had been on her feet too long. It had healed well, but the break had been bad enough to leave lasting effects. On those days when the pain was worse, she found she could not make the walk to town even with Finn's help. So Finn did what he had always done, he carried her. "The first time it happened," Fiona protested, "I am too heavy, I will hurt your back." Finn just laughed and scooped her up as though she weighed nothing at all. "I carry elk carcasses that weigh more than you. You are fine." He settled her in front of him on the horse, her back against his chest, his arms secure around her. The trail to Sierra Vista was steep and winding, but Finn navigated it with ease, pointing out landmarks to Fiona as they rode. "See that rock formation? That is where I shot my first mountain lion. And that meadow there, that is where I proposed to you in my head about 50 times before I finally worked up the courage to do it for real." Fiona laughed. "You never told me that. A man has to keep some mysteries." It became a pattern over the years. Whenever Fiona needed to go to town and her leg was bothering her, Finn would carry her there on his horse. The townspeople grew accustomed to seeing them arrive this way, the big mountain man and his wife, clearly still as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day. Once, Mrs. Henderson made a comment about it being improper for a grown woman to be carried around like a child. Fiona just smiled sweetly and said, "When you find someone who loves you enough to carry you through life's difficulties, Mrs. Henderson, I hope you have the good sense to let them." The years passed in a pleasant blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap. Rose proved to have her mother's gift with plants, spending hours in Fiona's workroom learning about herbs and remedies. When Samuel was 7 and Rose was 5, Fiona gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Peter and David. Finn built an addition onto the cabin to accommodate their growing family, and the sound of children's laughter became a constant backdrop to their lives. "We are going to need a bigger table," Fiona said one evening as they tried to squeeze everyone around the current one for dinner. "And more beds, and more storage for clothes, and probably a second barn at the rate we are going," Finn replied with a grin. "Are you complaining?" "Never, though I reserve the right to be exhausted." You're allowed to be exhausted. You are raising 4 children and running a business. We are raising 4 children, Fiona corrected. You do as much as I do. It was true. Finn had proven to be the kind of father who was fully involved in his children's lives. He changed nappies and soothed tears and told bedtime stories. He taught them to read using Fiona's old Bible and whatever books they could get from town. He showed them how to be strong, but also how to be kind, how to survive in the wilderness, but also how to respect it. On Samuel's 10th birthday, Finn gave him his first rifle, a small one, sized for a boy but well made. Your grandfather gave me my first rifle when I was your age, he told Samuel. A gun is a tool, not a toy. It is to be respected and cared for. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Samuel said solemnly, holding the rifle as though it were made of gold. Good. Then tomorrow we will go hunting together, just the 2 of us. I will teach you how to track deer. Fiona watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. Her eldest son was growing up, becoming more like his father every day. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. Rose, meanwhile, had declared that she wanted to be a healer like her mother. At 8 years old, she could already identify dozens of medicinal plants and knew how to prepare basic tinctures. Fiona taught her carefully, making sure she understood not just the how, but the why of each remedy. Why does willow bark help with pain? Rose asked one afternoon as they worked together. Because it contains something that reduces inflammation in the body. I do not know the exact science of it, but I know it works. Your grandmother taught me that, and her mother taught her, going back generations. And I will teach my daughter someday? If you want to, though you might also choose to be a doctor. I have heard there are medical schools accepting women now. Rose considered this seriously. I think I would rather learn from you. Doctors do not always know about plants the way we do. The twins, Peter and David, were inseparable 2 sides of the same coin. Peter was cautious and thoughtful, while David was bold and impulsive. They balanced each other perfectly, and Fiona often found them in some kind of trouble, whether it was trying to catch fish with their bare hands or seeing how far they could climb, before Finn noticed and ordered them down. Life was full and messy and sometimes chaotic, but Fiona loved every minute of it. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it when she left Texas all those years ago, a place to belong, people to love, a purpose beyond mere survival. One spring morning when Fiona was 33 and Finn was 35, they took a rare trip into town alone. Finn's mother had come from Missouri to visit and was watching the children for the day, giving Fiona and Finn a chance to be just husband and wife instead of parents for a few precious hours. They rode together on Finn's horse, as always, Fiona secure in his arms. But this time, when they reached the steep part of the trail where the path narrowed and the drop-off was treacherous, Finn dismounted and lifted Fiona into his arms instead. "What are you doing?" Fiona asked with a laugh. "I can ride." "I know, but I want to carry you. Just because." So he carried her down the trail, his strong arms never wavering, his sure feet finding purchase on the rocky ground. Fiona wrapped her arms around his neck and rested her head on his shoulder, marveling at how safe she always felt with him. "Do you remember the first time you carried me?" she asked. "When I broke my leg?" "How could I forget? I thought you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met, insisting you would walk 16 miles with a broken bone if I would just set it properly." I was terrified, not just of the pain, but of being helpless, of having to depend on someone else. And now I know that depending on someone is not weakness, it is trust. And I trust you with everything, my life, our children, my heart. Finn stopped walking to kiss her properly, there on the side of the mountain with the valley spread out below them. I love you, Fiona Norwood. I have loved you since the day I found you broken at the bottom of that slope, and I will love you until the day I die. I love you too, even when you are being overprotective and carrying me when I am perfectly capable of walking. Especially then. They spent the day in Sierra Vista, conducting business and enjoying the rare time alone together. They had lunch at the small restaurant, bought supplies at the general store, and even attended a town meeting about establishing a proper school. We should support this, Fiona said. Our children need a better education than we can provide at home. Agreed, though it will be strange having the cabin quiet during the days. As evening approached, they began the journey home. Finn carried Fiona again on the difficult parts of the trail, and she led him without protest. This had become their ritual, a physical reminder of how far they had come together. She had arrived in these mountains broken and alone, and he had been isolated and lonely. Together they had built something beautiful, a life, a family, a love that sustained them through everything. When they arrived home, they found the cabin in chaos. Finn's mother looked frazzled. The twins were covered in what appeared to be flour. Samuel was explaining earnestly how it was not actually his fault, and Rose was trying to clean up what looked like the remains of a failed baking experiment. "We tried to make you a cake as a surprise," Rose explained, her face apologetic, "but it did not go as planned." Fiona looked at Finn, and they both burst out laughing. This was their life, messy, unpredictable, full of love and laughter and occasional disasters. "It is all right," Fiona said, pulling Rose into a hug. "Let us clean this up together, and then your father can tell you all about the town meeting." As they worked to restore order to the cabin, Finn caught Fiona's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that same bright smile that had first caught his heart all those years ago. He smiled back, knowing that every day with her was a gift, every moment precious. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. Samuel grew into a young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's compassion. He took over much of the hunting and trapping, allowing Finn to slow down a bit as his joints began to protest the harsh mountain winters. Rose apprenticed herself to the town doctor, learning conventional medicine while still practicing her herbal remedies. She became known throughout the territory for her healing skills, and people came from miles around to see her. The twins proved to be natural businessmen, expanding Fiona's remedy business into a thriving enterprise. They built a proper workshop separate from the cabin and hired several young people from town to help with production. What had started as Fiona's small side project became a source of income that provided security for the whole family. Finn still trapped and hunted, but now it was more for the love of it than necessity. He would take long walks through the mountains he loved, sometimes alone, sometimes with Samuel or one of the twins, and he always came home to Fiona. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Finn surprised Fiona with a gift. He led her outside to where a beautiful wagon waited, painted green with their name on the side. "I know you cannot walk the trail to town like you used to," he said, "and I know your leg pains you more these days, so I thought instead of carrying you, we could ride together in style." Fiona ran her hands over the smooth wood, tears in her eyes. "It is beautiful. But Finn, you know I never minded being carried." "I know. But I'm not getting any younger either. This way we can both be comfortable." He helped her up onto the seat and climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "What do you say we take it for a ride?" They drove into town together, waving at neighbors who called out greetings. The wagon made the journey much easier, but Fiona found herself missing the feeling of being in Finn's arms, held securely against his chest as they navigated the trail. "I miss being carried," she admitted as they drove home that evening. Finn laughed. "You are the only woman in the territory who would say such a thing. That is because I am the only woman in the territory married to you." "True enough." He pulled the wagon to a stop, set the brake, and turned to her. "How about this? On nice days when your leg is not bothering you, we take the wagon. But on those days when you need it, I will still carry you. Deal?" "Deal." And that is exactly what they did. Some days they rode in the wagon, comfortable and practical. But other days, when Fiona's leg ached or when they both felt nostalgic, Finn would lift her into his arms and carry her down the mountain trail, just like he had so many times before. The townspeople never stopped finding it charming. 20 years married, and he still carries her around like a new bride, Mrs. Patterson told her daughter. That is true love right there. Even Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly and less bitter, had to admit that she had been wrong about Fiona and Finn. "I suppose some people are just meant to find each other," she told Reverend Matthews one Sunday, "even if it happens in unconventional ways." As Fiona and Finn entered their 40s, they began to think about the future differently. Their children were grown, or nearly so, making their own paths in the world. Samuel had married a sweet girl from town and was building his own cabin near his parents. Rose was so busy with her medical practice that she had postponed marriage, saying she had not found anyone interesting enough to give up her work for. "She is just like her mother," Finn said proudly, strong-willed and independent. The twins, now strapping young men of 18, ran the family business with skill and enthusiasm. They talked about expanding beyond Arizona, about opening shops in other territories. "The world is changing," Peter said one evening over dinner. "There are trains now connecting the territories, telegraph lines going up everywhere. We could ship remedies all over the West." "Just promise me you will not change the recipes," Fiona said. "These are my mother's formulas, passed down through generations." "We promise," David assured her. "Grandmother's remedies are what make our products special." Finn and Fiona found themselves with more time alone than they had had in years. They fell back into the rhythms of their early marriage, spending long evenings talking by the fire, taking walks through the mountains they both loved, working side by side in the garden. Are you happy?" Finn asked one evening as they watched the sunset from their porch. He held her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Fiona said honestly. "I have everything I ever wanted: a home, a family, meaningful work, and most importantly, you." "I was thinking," Finn said slowly. "We have spent so much time building this life, raising our children, working. Maybe it is time we did something just for us." "Like what?" "You once told me you dreamed of seeing the ocean. What if we went? Just the two of us. We could take the train to California, spend a few weeks by the sea." Fiona turned to him in surprise. "Leave the mountains? You never leave the mountains." "I would leave them for you. Besides, they will still be here when we get back." So they planned their trip, the first time either of them had been farther than Sierra Vista since arriving in Arizona decades earlier. Samuel and Rose promised to watch over things while they were gone, and the twins insisted on paying for the trip as a thank you for everything their parents had done for them. The journey west was an adventure in itself. Fiona marveled at the train, at the speed with which they crossed distances that would have taken weeks on horseback. Finn was less impressed by the technology and more interested in the changing landscape outside the window. When they finally reached the California coast and Fiona saw the ocean for the first time, she wept. The vast expanse of blue stretching to the horizon, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the salt smell in the air, it was everything she had imagined and more. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Oh, Finn, it is so beautiful." They spent 2 weeks in a small coastal town, walking on the beach each morning, exploring tide pools, watching the sun set over the water. They talked about their life together, about all the memories they had made, about the future that still stretched before them. "When I found you broken at the bottom of that slope," Finn said one evening as they sat on the beach watching the stars come out, "I never imagined this is where we would end up, a life full of love and children and purpose." "I was so lost back then," Fiona admitted, "walking those 16 miles every day because I did not know what else to do, where else to go. And then I fell, and you found me, and everything changed. I fell too, you know. Not down a mountain, but just as hard. I fell in love with you." Fiona leaned against his solid shoulder, watching the waves roll in and out. "We saved each other." "Yes, we did." When they returned to Arizona, they found that they appreciated the mountains even more after their time away. The cabin felt like the haven it had always been, and Fiona threw herself back into her work with renewed energy. The years continued to be kind to them. Finn's hair turned silver, but he remained strong, still able to carry Fiona when she needed it, though perhaps not quite as far as he once could. Fiona's leg ached more in cold weather, but her hands remained steady as she prepared her remedies, and her mind stayed sharp. They became grandparents when Samuel and his wife welcomed a son. Then another grandchild arrived, and another. Rose eventually married a traveling doctor who was impressed by her skill and knowledge, and they set up a joint practice in Sierra Vista. The twins married sisters from a neighboring town and began raising their own families. Fiona and Finn found themselves surrounded by children and grandchildren on holidays and special occasions, the cabin they had shared for so long now bursting at the seams with family. It was chaotic and wonderful, and Fiona would not have traded it for anything. "Remember when it was just the two of us in this cabin?" Finn asked one Christmas as they surveyed the crowd of family members filling every available space. "Barely," Fiona said with a laugh. It seems like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. A good lifetime. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered to celebrate. Samuel had expanded his cabin to accommodate everyone, and they spent the day eating, talking, and sharing memories. "Tell us how you met," one of the grandchildren begged. "Tell us the story again." So Finn and Fiona told the story they had told 100 times before, how Fiona had fallen and broken her leg trying to walk to town alone, how Finn had found her and carried her to his cabin, how he had cared for her through her recovery, how they had fallen in love in that small mountain cabin and decided to build a life together. "And Grandpa still carries Grandma when she needs it," Samuel added, "even now." "Because when you love someone," Finn said, pulling Fiona close, "you carry them through the hard times as well as the good. That is what marriage is." As evening fell and the family began to disperse to their various homes, Fiona and Finn found themselves alone on Samuel's porch, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so many years. 30 years, Fiona marveled. How did we get so lucky? "I do not think it was luck," Finn said thoughtfully. "I think it was choice. You chose to stay when you could have left. I chose to open my heart when I could have stayed isolated. We chose each other, every day for 30 years. And I would choose you every day for 30 more. Even when I am too old and feeble to carry you anymore. Even then, though I hope we have a few more years of trail carrying left in us." "Oh, I think we do. I am not ready to be too old quite yet." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a young woman walking 16 miles alone through dangerous mountains to wash clothes, to the matriarch of a large and loving family. From a solitary mountain man who had lost everything to war, to a father and grandfather surrounded by love. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them both. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the lessons they had learned about love, about perseverance, about the importance of family and home. But more than that, they had created a legacy of devotion. The story of the mountain man who carried his wife to town whenever she asked became legendary in Sierra Vista. Parents told it to their children as an example of what true love looked like. Young couples repeated their vows, hoping to build the same kind of lasting partnership. And Finn and Fiona continued to live that story every day. As they grew older still, approaching their 40th anniversary, they found that their roles had begun to reverse in some ways. Finn's knees bothered him more, his back ached on cold mornings. Fiona, though her leg still pained her, found herself supporting him more often, helping him when he needed it. "I think I am finally too old to carry you," Finn admitted one morning, after a particularly difficult night where his back had seized up. "That's all right," Fiona said, helping him sit up carefully. "You carried me for decades. It's my turn to carry you now." "You cannot actually carry me. I'm twice your size." "I can carry you in other ways. I can make your medicine, rub your back, help you walk when you need it. There is more than one way to carry someone through life." And so they continued, adjusting to the changes that age brought, but never losing the fundamental connection that had sustained them for so long. They moved a bit slower, napped more often, but their love remained as strong as ever. On their 40th anniversary, they made one final trip to town together. Finn could not carry Fiona anymore, and she could not walk the whole way even with her stick, so they rode in the wagon drawn by a gentle old horse that Samuel had given them. The journey took longer than it once had, with frequent stops to rest both themselves and the horse. But Fiona did not mind. She held Finn's hand as they rode, pointing out landmarks, remembering all the times they had traveled this trail together over the years. When they reached Sierra Vista, they found that the town had planned a celebration in their honor. 40 years of marriage was rare enough, but the story of their devotion had become legendary. Everyone wanted to honor them. Reverend Matthews, now retired but still beloved, gave a speech about love and commitment. The mayor presented them with a proclamation declaring it Finn and Fiona Norwood Day. Their children and grandchildren surprised them with a photograph the whole family gathered together, multiple generations united. As they posed for the picture, Fiona looked around at all these people who existed because she had fallen down a mountain one day and a lonely man had chosen to help her. This was their legacy, spread out before them in living color. That night, lying in bed in Samuel's cabin because the journey home was too much for one day, Fiona turned to Finn. "Are you glad I fell?" she asked. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm serious. If I had not broken my leg that day, we would never have met. You would still be alone in your cabin, and I would probably be dead or married to someone else. Are you glad it happened?" Finn considered this carefully. "I'm sorry you were hurt. I would never wish pain on you. But I'm grateful for everything that came after. You taught me how to live again, Fiona. Before you, I was just existing. You gave me a reason to wake up each morning, a purpose beyond mere survival. You did the same for me. I was so lost, Finn. I thought walking those 16 miles every day made me strong, but I was really just running away from having to figure out who I was or what I wanted. And now you know? Now I know that I am yours, and you are mine. And that is enough. More than enough. It is everything." They fell asleep holding hands, the way they had for 40 years, the way they would for however many years remained to them. In the end, Fiona and Finn lived to see their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Their story had become part of Sierra Vista's history, told and retold by multiple generations. The trail that had once been so difficult to walk had been improved over the years, turned into a proper road that wagons and eventually automobiles could travel. But old-timers still called it the Norwood Trail, remembering the mountain man who had carried his wife up and down it countless times simply because she asked. On their final days, Fiona and Finn lay in the bed they had shared for 5 decades, in the cabin that had been their first home together. Their children took turns sitting with them, holding their hands, telling them it was all right to let go. "I am not ready," Finn whispered to Fiona when they were alone. "I am not ready to leave you." "Then we will go together," Fiona said, "the way we have done everything else, together." And that is exactly what they did. Fiona passed first, slipping away peacefully in her sleep with Finn's arms around her. He followed her less than a day later, his heart finally giving out after she was gone. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the valley, where the mountains they both loved so much stood as eternal witnesses to their love. The whole town turned out for the funeral, along with family members who came from all over the territory. At the graveside, Samuel read from his mother's Bible, his voice breaking with emotion. Rose spoke about her parents' unwavering devotion to each other and to their family. The twins, now middle-aged men with families of their own, placed wildflowers on the graves, the same kind that Fiona had once gathered to brighten the cabin. And then, because it seemed fitting, someone began to tell the story one more time. The story of how a woman who could not walk the trail to town alone had been carried by a mountain man every time she asked. How that simple act of service had blossomed into a love that lasted 50 years and touched countless lives. The story lived on long after Fiona and Finn were gone. It was told by parents to children, by grandparents to grandchildren, by teachers in the school that Fiona had championed. It became part of the mythology of Sierra Vista, a reminder that love was not just a feeling, but a choice, an action, a daily commitment. Years later, when people traveled the road to town, they would sometimes stop at the graves on the hill and leave flowers. Young couples would come there to exchange vows, hoping their love would be as enduring. Old-timers would sit and remember the days when a massive mountain man would ride through town with his small wife held carefully in his arms, and everyone who saw them knew they were witnessing something special. The cabin still stood, maintained by the family as a memorial. Visitors could see the bed where Fiona had recovered from her injury, the workroom where she had prepared her remedies, the porch where she and Finn had sat countless evenings watching the sunset. But more than the physical space, the cabin held the memory of a love that had transformed 2 lonely, broken people into a family, a legacy, a legend. And every time someone told the story, they would end it the same way. She could not walk the trail to town on her own, and he carried her there every time she asked, not because he had to, but because he loved her. And that made all the difference.